One of Hollywood's revenue cruxes is a good old-fashioned grindhouse film. Whether just a hint or in whole, horror, slasher, and cult films take bits and pieces from real life, just as any other genre might, only with more gore, guts, and blood. Often categorized as one of horror's most revolutionary films, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre's main character, Leatherface, was inspired in part by a real-life case from the 1950s. Saturday, November 16, 1957. Bernice Warden, owner of a hardware store in Plainfield, Wisconsin, was likely sure that when she walked out her front door, she'd be returning home at some point in the day. Little did she realize that her final moments were closing in. Bernice arrived at her store and went about what appeared to be a normal morning routine, according to Bernard Mashinsky Jr., the owner of the gas station across the street with a clear view of Warden's store, which also served as a registration site for deer killing. He placed her at 8:15 a.m., checking her mail per usual. Shortly thereafter, noted a delivery of inventory having been dropped off. Some minutes later, between 8:30 and 9:30, Mashinsky recalled the hardware store's truck pulling away from the property, driven by a figure he believed to be a man. Thinking Warden had hired a driver to make deliveries for her, Mashinsky continued about his business. He later went across the street to Warden's store, only to find the front door was locked. He noticed that Bernice left the lights on, but being that it was opening day for hunting season, business was generally slow, and Mashinsky chalked it up to Bernice just closing early for that reason. That evening, Bernice's son Frank, who had been out hunting all day, stopped by Mashinsky's gas station on his way home to inquire about a hunting contest. As they chatted, Mashinsky mentioned to Frank that his mother had closed the store early, but that the lights were left on. Frank, who also happened to be a deputy sheriff, was immediately concerned, as he knew his mother had planned on staying at the store all day. He quickly went to investigate. With his training, he secured the scene, and to his horror, was a trail of blood leading towards the back of the store. Not only was Bernice missing, but the cash register was also gone. While searching for clues, one man immediately came to mind, one who's been frequenting the store as of late, who was also just there the night before, inquiring about antifreeze, even striking up a conversation with Frank, asking him if he'd be out hunting on this very day, to which Frank confirmed. This man was Ed Gein, a recluse who mostly kept to himself, but was found to be behaving peculiarly leading up to this moment. He'd even asked Bernice to go out roller skating, and being that this was a small community where everyone knew each other, word of the strange Ed Gein actually speaking to a woman in that manner struck people as abnormal for him, and made for some good small-town gossip. Ed Gein was born on August 27, 1906, in Wisconsin. His mother was an overzealous religious woman whose extreme faith domineered the household. She constantly warned Ed and his brother Henry about the dangers of women, and abhorred all sex, especially that which occurred out of wedlock, stating that sex for procreation was horrendous but tolerated to establish a family. Their intense and intimidating upbringing put the brothers on opposite ends of the spectrum. While Ed deeply worshipped his mother to a degree he developed what some have called an obsession for her, Henry, on the other hand, resisted her strict views. Their father was an alcoholic who essentially submitted to his intimidating wife. He died of a heart attack when Ed was in his 30s. Ed would pick up odd jobs to help the family get by, including babysitting, which he was said to be great at, popular with both kids and parents. It's believed that Ed wanted his mother's affection for himself, and in 1944, his brother Henry would turn up dead. The incident leading to his death, however, was mysterious and highly questionable. Ed called the police to help him look for his brother, who he claimed disappeared in the midst of trying to put out a brush fire approaching their property. When they arrived, Ed led police directly to where Henry's body was. Strangely, his body showed no signs of having been burned, despite the fact that it was resting on scorched grounds. Additionally, bruises on the back of his head were found, but no foul play was suspected, as it was thought that perhaps Henry had hit his head on the ground after succumbing to the smoke. Not long after his brother's death, Ed's world would be devastated by the loss of his beloved mother. She suffered a stroke in 1945 and was given the utmost care by Ed, and just 6 months later, a second stroke would take her life. Ed was now alone. He'd lost the one person who'd made up his entire world, but he would not let her go so easily. Now living mostly as a hermit, Ed only went out for work and spent the rest of his free time at home, where he devotedly maintained areas of the house that his mother used, preserving it just as she left it. These parts of the home were boarded up and tended to, while the rest of the house was sorely neglected. If Ed Gein was not lost and disturbed before, he certainly was now. While surveying the crime scene, Frank found the last receipt written that morning for a gallon of antifreeze, sold to Ed Gein. With his sheriff's instinct and hunch confirmed, Frank immediately sought out Gein. Meanwhile, a knock on Ed's door caught him in the middle of something gruesome. On the other side of it were some teenage kids who needed assistance with their car. But the kids were no stranger to Ed. They were from the neighboring family, with whom Ed was known to frequently have dinner with. They noticed his hands were covered in blood, to which he claimed he'd been dressing a deer and would need to wash up before assisting the kids with the family car. Ed stayed to eat supper with the family, and just as they were finishing, they learned of Warden's disappearance. The son asked Gein if he'd give him a ride to see what was going on, to which he agreed. Before the two could pull away, authorities arrived in search of Gein, finding him sitting in his car with the neighbor's son. They put Ed into the back of the squad car and asked him to detail his day from start to finish. After doing so, they asked him to retell it, where Gein failed to repeat his story. They began questioning his response, to which Gein said, "Somebody framed me." The officers then asked him what he thought he was being framed for, and he answered, "Mrs. Warden." They pushed for more answers, asking Gein about what happened to Mrs. Warden and what he thought he was wanted for. His response was something only the perpetrator would have known, as the public only knew that Mrs. Warden had gone missing at this point. Gein incriminated himself with, "She's dead, ain't she?" While Gein was taken into custody, officers inspected his property, and what they found was an extremely grisly scene. The body of Mrs. Warden was in an attached shed, hung up by her ankles, decapitated, and cut open like a deer. Her head was found in a burlap sack, and her heart near the stove in a plastic bag. Mrs. Warden's body was among several other human remains found on the property. In addition, they found a refrigerator on Gein's property that was filled with human organs, which some have further theorized that he stored to cook and eat. The other bodies that were discovered were found in unthinkable ways, as everyday objects. They found furniture fashioned from human skin and body parts, such as wastebaskets, lampshades, shade pole made of lips, even a chair with fat still attached to it used as the seat, among other things. But that wasn't all. Skulls were fashioned as bedposts, and various body parts such as noses, lips, fingernails, and a box with parts of female genitals were also discovered. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, they also found skin suits consisting of leggings, a top with breasts, and 9 masks made of women's facial skin. An autopsy would later reveal that Mrs. Warden had been shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber gun and mutilated after death. After being brutally questioned for days, Gein finally confessed to the murder of Mrs. Warden, claiming that it was an accident. Gein noted that he would go in and out of a daze and would often snap out of it before anything seriously damaging could happen, and that he didn't remember much of the murder as it occurred while in this daze. With the number of bodies found in his property, it would appear that Gein was a serial killer. However, he claimed that the other bodies were collected from fresh graves between the years of 1947 and 1952. Gein frequently read the obituaries and further explained that he visited cemeteries about 40 times during that period, but always in a daze. Of the many times he visited, 9 times he was unable to snap out of it and dug up the bodies of middle-aged women who resembled his mother, which he'd used to create the horror police had discovered in his house. Several graves were dug up where either parts or entire bodies were missing, confirming Gein's story. It is said that he also stole his mother's corpse after it was buried. Some have said he apparently had the hope to literally crawl into her skin. It's also said that he claimed to wear the body parts and dance around outside in the moonlight. The face and skull of Mary Hogan, a tavern keeper who went missing in December of 1954, was also discovered in his home. Some sources report that Gein also admitted to her murder. However, most sources say he either never admitted it or admitted to it and then denied it. It's even said that he told people he had murdered her, but his confession was usually just chalked up to him just being weird. Gein was arraigned for first-degree murder in the case of Bernice Warden. He was also charged for theft of the cash register and its contents. Gein pleaded not guilty by reasons of insanity and was diagnosed with schizophrenia, deeming him unfit to stand trial. He was first sent to Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane and later transferred to a different hospital. Strangely, after this trial, His house was destroyed in a fire. Arson was suspected but not confirmed. His car, which had been used to transport bodies, was sold to a carnival sideshow. And in 1968, after 10 years of being hospitalized, Gein was finally deemed fit to stand trial for the murder of Bernice Worden, where he continued to plead not guilty for the reason of insanity. He waived his right to a trial by jury, leaving his fate solely in the hands of the judge. The trial was made up of two parts. The first was to determine if Gein was guilty of the murder, and the second was to determine if he was sane or not at the time of the murder. During his testimony, Gein claimed that a rifle he was inspecting at Worden's hardware store accidentally went off, killing Bernice. Gein was deemed insane at the time of the murder, and was ultimately found guilty. In a press conference shortly after his trial, he blamed his behavior on his upbringing. He was never charged with the murder of Mary Hogan or any of the grave robberies. He was sent back to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane, where he petitioned for release in the 1970s, but was denied. Ed Gein would remain there until July 26, 1984, when he died of respiratory failure due to lung cancer at the age of 77. So how was this horrendous ordeal the inspiration for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you might ask? While Leatherface is a fully fictional character, there are elements of the story and persona that were loosely inspired by Ed Gein's real-life crimes. Director Tobe Hooper said in an interview that his character Leatherface, along with some parts of the movie, were inspired by Gein and his atrocious crimes. Apart from the main character, how the rest of the movie connects to Gein are seen throughout the details of the film. Some of which are implied through elements, while others are directly demonstrated by the characters, such as cannibalism, the murder and brutal mutilation of multiple women, scenes with a room full of furniture made of people, and one of the characters being impaled on a meat hook. The extent of Leatherface's murderous spree was more extensive than his real-life inspiration. While Ed Gein was indeed a murderer, whose world was sickly twisted and grotesque, his preferred modus operandi seemed to be in grave robbing. Gein was more notoriously known at the time as the Butcher of Plainfield and as a body snatcher. Moreover, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that Gein ever used a chainsaw as his preferred murder weapon, especially no evidence that he used it on live victims. It's also commonly mistaken that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was based on true events, largely due to the film's opening narration, which states,
"The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre,"
which left many believing that the story derived from some form of truth. The only truth about that statement is that it was a narrative and creative decision by Hooper, reportedly as a marketing tactic in hopes of attracting a wider audience. It was also said to be a cultural political statement in response to a high-profile scandal involving the US government that was unfolding at the time Hooper was conceptualizing and making the film. As for the chainsaw, it was inspired by a shopping trip. Having worked on the story for months in isolation, Hooper found himself in a large shopping crowd where he recalled, "Those big crowds have always gotten to me. There were just so many people to go through, and I was just standing there in front of the upright display of chainsaws." A light bulb went off, and his eyes went from the chainsaw to the crowd, saying, "Oh, I know how I could get out of this place fast if I just start one of those things up and make that sound." Of course I didn't. That was just a fantasy. Another notable character who was inspired by Ed Gein is Robert Bloch's Norman Bates from the 1959 novel Psycho. The inspiration here is drawn from the dynamics of Gein's relationship with his mother and some of their personality traits which are reflected in Bloch's characters. The book went on to inspire Alfred Hitchcock's infamous film of the same name, released in 1960. Ed Gein making skin outfits also provided some inspiration for the character Buffalo Bill, the killer in Silence of the Lambs, from 1991. Upon its release in 1974, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre made over $30 million in the 117 weeks it played in theaters. Critical reception was mixed, with many shocked by the film's content of exploitative horror, but impressed by the technical skill of the filmmaker. Linda Gross of the Los Angeles Times called it a despicable film, and Roger Ebert called it a grisly little item, while also praising it as some kind of weird, off-the-wall achievement. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was among a slew of a new type of horror slasher grindhouse films to come out of the 1970s, arguably revolutionizing how horror films were produced and consumed. These low-budget films are eventually what led to the now billion-dollar industry of horror cinema and a key portion of Hollywood's economy, producing some of Hollywood's most notorious auteur filmmakers, such as Brian De Palma, Wes Craven, John Carpenter, and of course, Tobe Hooper. The popular website Screen Rant ranks 1974's version as the best among the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, saying that no matter how many reboots and sequels to Hooper's original films are made, nothing will ever come close to his 1974 fever dream. No matter the genre, stories all derive from somewhere. So the next time you're reading your favorite novel or watching your favorite movie, ask yourself, where did this idea come from?